So hello and welcome to day 3 of The Boy Who Made the World Disappear. We'll start with chapter 5. I'm really sorry, Harrison, said Miss Bagulum, still sounding in shock, but it looks like you're going to have to miss your swimming lesson. That's okay, said Harrison, trying to look sad, but secretly jumping for joy. They were back in the changing room while all the other children carried on their lesson. Miss Bagulum called 999. But when the man on the end of the phone asked, "Which service?" she found it very hard to decide. There wasn't a fire, so she didn't need a fire engine, and no one had committed a crime, so there's no point informing the police. She thought about calling an ambulance, but Harrison insisted he was absolutely fine. To make matters worse, when she tried to explain to the man from 999 that all the water in the shallow swimming pool had vanished into thin air, he thought she was making a prank call and got very cross and hung up. So 1 minute the water was there, Miss Bagulum said to Harrison, and the next it disappeared. Harrison nodded. I think what happened, said Miss Bagulum, trying to make sense of it all, is there must have been a leak. Yes, Miss Harrison. I mean, water doesn't just disappear, does it, Miss Bagulum? Balogun. No, said Harrison. Maybe the caretaker emptied it for a cleaning and didn't tell us. Almost definitely, said Harrison. He felt mean for tricking his teacher, but it was either that or get into a lot of trouble and possibly get his black hole confiscated. Are you definitely okay? Asked Miss Balogun. 100%, Harrison replied. Okay, said Miss Balogun, happier now that she'd decided on some sort of explanation. Why don't we both get changed and have a hot chocolate while we wait for the rest of the class? To Harrison's great joy, that's exactly what they did. And Harrison was not only allowed a hot chocolate, dairy-free of course, but a packet of crisps as well, in his favourite flavour, salt and vinegar. And while they waited, Miss Balogun called the council and complained about the shallow pool being emptied without any notice, which seemed to make her feel much better. Harrison stared lovingly at his black hole. The two of them were going to have so much fun together now that it had drunk all that water. It was back to its normal size. Shelley's grandmother had been right. It really did need feeding. The first opportunity for Harrison to feed the hole again came almost immediately. Harrison, like most of you, I'm sure, was not a big fan of school food, and on the menu that lunchtime was liver and onions. Yuck! To make matters worse, that week Hector Brown was handy helper. Handy helpers got to wear a crown, help Miss Balogun in the classroom, and have an extra biscuit at afternoon break. They also served the food out to everyone else at lunchtime. Hector had been handy helper before. In fact, he'd been chosen lots and lots of times, and Hector being in charge of lunchtime meant that if there was something tasty on the menu, then Harrison would get hardly any. And if there was something horrible, Hector Broom would make sure Harrison got the biggest portion in the tin. As you might expect, when the tin arrived on the table, Hector Broom gave himself a tiny piece of liver and gave Harrison one that was giant. Do you want some onions? Asked Hector. No, thank you, said Harrison. Of course, Hector Broom didn't listen and dished out half a bucketful. Then he served all the other children on the table, giving them big pieces of liver too. He gave everyone a tiny spoonful of mashed potato and himself a whole heap. So you can imagine how surprised Hector was when, barely a minute later, Harrison pushed forward his empty plate and licked his lips. Harrison said, "Thank you, Hector. That was absolutely delicious." Of course, Harrison had hidden his black hole down by his feet. And what Hector Broom didn't see was that Harrison's uneaten lunch slowly fading to nothing on its surface. "Oh, you liked it, did you?" Hector said with a sneer. "Well, there's a bit extra of liver here. You can have that too." He put a huge piece on Harrison's plate. Harrison waited until Hector wasn't looking, then dumped the liver in his black hole, and once again pushed forward his empty plate. "Yum," said Harrison. "Thank you, that was delicious." The other children at the table laughed, which made Hector Broom, who always liked to be the boss, very cross indeed. "I see," he said, "then you can eat all of ours too." And, thinking he was being really mean, Hector Broom took his serving spoon and piled all of everyone else's portions onto Harrison's plate. Then he took his own tiny morsel and arranged it on top. "Happy eating, liver boy," said Hector Broom with a smile. Oh, is that all? Asked Harrison. You haven't got any more, have you? The other children laughed again, and Hector Broom got even more angry. Shut up, he hissed at them. It's not funny. Look, said Harrison, pointing. It's crumble for pudding. While Hector was distracted, Harrison tipped his entire plate into the black hole, then pushed it forward, completely empty. Finished, he announced. The other children started laughing and clapping. Hector Broom narrowed his eyes. Cheat, he growled. You threw it on the floor. He stormed round to where Harrison was sitting, expecting to see a pile of discarded liver. But, of course, all he saw was Harrison's black hole. Where did it go? And what's this? He asked, pointing at the black hole. Careful, said Harrison. It's my balloon from your party. Don't touch it. What a baby, cooed Hector, bringing his balloon to school. The other children laughed, and Harrison felt his ears go hot. Then Hector Broom took out his elastic band and flexed it meaningly. You wait, he said with an evil glint in his eyes. I'm going to get you. No one makes a fool of me. Sure enough, the showdown with Hector Broom happened straight after lunch. Harrison was in the middle of a game of cops and robbers with his friends when he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to see Hector Broom flanked by two bigger boys from the year above. He just had time to grab his black hole before the two boys hoisted him up by his armpits and carried him across the playground, then dumped him down behind the bike shed. Think you're clever, do you, liver boy? Snarled Hector. Behind the bike shed was Hector Broom's favourite place to bring his victims. It was completely hidden from the teachers, and so the perfect place for him to wield his elastic band. Harrison knew he had to act fast. Leave me alone, Hector, he shouted, hoping someone might hear him and come to his rescue. Shh, whispered Hector Broom and stroked Harrison's hair like a villain in a movie. One more word and bite her. He pulled out his elastic band, ready to strike. We'll have something to say about it. No one can see you here, Squirt, said one of the bigger boys. It's very secluded, said the other. That's a year 5 word. It means no one can see us, clarified the first bigger boy, looking smug. Oh, yes, they can, shouted Harrison, and swung his black hole at the metal wall of the bike shed. What happened next was extraordinary. The entire bike shed and all the bikes in it crumpled into nothing, shooting off into the black hole. It was like that trick magicians do when they pull a string of hankies out of their sleeve, but in reverse. A split second later, all of that was left at the back of at the edge of the black hole was the handlebars of a bicycle slowly fading from view. Hector Broom and the two bigger boys couldn't believe their eyes. What's going on? Asked Hector. My bike's gone, said one of the bigger boys. It's an illusion like Britain's Got Talent, said the other. Over by the school, the teacher on duty, Mr. Yeebsley, looked up to see what the commotion was. He scratched his head. Hadn't there been a bike shed there a minute ago? Now that Mr. Yeebsley and the whole schoolyard could see him, Hector Broom didn't dare ping Harrison with his elastic band in case he got caught. Did you say you got that at my party? He asked Harrison, pointing at the black hole. I only got a lousy brown one and it's already gone flat. Harrison nodded. I'll trade you for it, said Hector Broom. No, Harrison said in the bravest voice he could manage. I don't want to trade. Hector had made him trade so many things he had loved, his fossils, his crystals, his Pokemon cards. But his black hole was the one thing he wasn't giving to Hector for anything. Hector Broom glanced across at Mr. Yeebsley, who was staring straight at them. Fine, then I'll just take it. It was my birthday. I should have had the best balloon, said Hector, and snatched hold of the string. No, shouted Harrison, holding on as tight as he could. The two bigger boys looked at each other. They wanted to help Hector, but now that they didn't have the bike shed to hide behind, they were worried about getting caught. Let go, hissed Hector in Harrison's ears. Never, said Harrison, pulling with all his might. It's mine. Have it then, said Hector, and let go. Harrison tumbled to the ground, still holding on tight to the string. For a few seconds, Harrison just sat there, panting. "Oi!" shouted Mr. Yeatley. "What's going on?" "Nothing, sir," Hector called back with a smile. Then he held out his hand to Harrison. "I'm so sorry," he said. "Let me help you up." "Good boy, Hector," called Mr. Yeatley. But of course, Hector didn't help Harrison up. Instead, as soon as the teacher wasn't looking, he aimed Biter at Harrison's left earlobe. "Yow!" yelped Harrison and let go of the black hole. "Thank you very much," said Hector Broom, grabbing the string and admiring his new toy. "How do you think it works?" he asked the two bigger boys, stretching out a podgy finger. "Don't do it," blurted Harrison. "It's not really a balloon. It's a black hole. It'll suck you in and you'll never be able to get out again." "Forget it, liver boy," said Hector Broom with a snarl. "I'm not falling for any more of your trick." But that was as much as he got to say, because at that very instant, Hector Broom touched the edge of the black hole and shot inside, like a boy falling head first through an open manhole. 1 minute he was there, and the next, all that could be seen was the soles of his shoes fading slowly from view. "Hector Broom," Miss Balogun called, taking the register after lunch. No one replied. "Has anyone seen Hector?" asked Miss Balogun, peering over at Hector Broom's empty desk. Harrison snuck a guilty glance at his black hole floating beside him. If anything, it was now slightly larger than when Shelley had given it to him. He wondered if he should say something to Miss Balogun. But who was going to believe him if he said Hector Broom had disappeared into a black hole? "No," asked the teacher one more time. "Well," said Miss Balogun, "perhaps he's gone home. I'll check with the school secretary in any case. Somebody else had better be handy helper. Harrison, as you had to miss out on swimming this morning, would you like to help me?" Harrison couldn't help but grin. He'd always wanted to be handy helper. "Oh, yes, please," he said, and walked to the front of the class. Miss Balogun picked up the handy helper crown from her desk and placed it on Harrison's head. It fitted perfectly. "Right, well, for starters, could you please go to the cupboard and take out the geography textbooks?" asked Miss Balogun. "We're going to learn about waste management, and then we're going to have a test on it." "Oh," moaned all the children. Geography was not their favourite subject. "Perhaps everyone would rather do French instead," said Miss Balogun, knowing full well that French was the only subject worse than geography. "Geography," came the reply. "Geography it is then," said Miss Balogun, handing Harrison the key to the store cupboard. "But," said Harrison, "but..." He was starting to feel extremely anxious. He hated tests. "Yes, Harrison?" asked Miss Balogun. I'm, stuttered Harrison, trying really hard not to lose his cool. "I don't want to do a test!" was what he wanted to shout, closely followed by, "Go and get the books yourself!" But he figured that might get him into all sorts of trouble. He caught sight of the black hole peeping out from behind his desk. Of course, he didn't need to lose his temper. He could use the black hole instead. "I'll go and do that right now," he said in a bit of a shouty voice, because he was still quite worked up. "Right," said Miss Balogun, slightly confused as to why Harrison was speaking so loudly. "Thank you." As calmly as he could, Harrison walked past his desk, making sure to pick up his black hole, and out to the cupboard in the corridor. Just a few seconds later, he returned. Miss Balogun," he said. "Yes," she replied. "All the books have gone. All that's left in the cupboard are the games." "What?" asked Miss Balogun, and went with Harrison to look for herself. Sure enough, every shelf of the book cupboard was empty. Not only were there no geography textbooks, but all the other books had gone too. All that was left was a pile of board games, kept there for the last day of school. "That's very odd," said Miss Balogun. "I'm sure they were here yesterday." She frowned. First a disappearing swimming pool, and now this. She felt like she needed a long lie down. "It's a mystery," said Harrison, trying hard not to smile or glance at his black hole, in case he gave himself away. Instead, of course, he was fizzing with delight. He didn't need to lose his temper ever again to get his own way. This was great. "Excuse me, everyone," said Miss Balogun, when they were back in the classroom. "All our books seem to have..." Gone missing. So while I go to the office and try and track them down and to ask about Hector, I suggest you occupy yourself with these. She held up a pile of board games and the children shrieked for joy. That afternoon was one of the best of Harrison's life, right up there with his trip to the Science Museum and his visit to the safari park. By the time afternoon break arrived, all the children in his class were so grateful that Harrison had managed somehow to lose all the school books and given them an afternoon off. That every single one of them gave him their biscuit as a thank you. When he added his own extra biscuit for being handy helper, he nearly had an entire packet. He had to ask for an extra glass of milk so he could finish them all off. And what was even better was there was no Hector Broom to ruin it by pushing him around and threatening him with his dastardly elastic band. After school, as he walked home with his mother and Lana, it occurred to Harrison that he wouldn't have to put up with any of the things that made him cross or scared or worried ever again. Anything he didn't like could just disappear into the black hole. Poof! This was going to be brilliant. He was so wrapped up in happy thoughts of making all the sprouts in the world disappear that he didn't notice he was dawdling way behind Lana and his mother. And when Mr. Hardwick tapped him on the shoulder, it took him a while to return to reality. I don't suppose you've seen her, have you, Harrison? Mr. Hardwick asked. In his hand was a leaflet with a photo of Blue on it. It read, "Lost dog. Please help us find our beloved Blue. We miss her so much. Any information, please contact Mr. and Mr. Hardwick, Farthing's Cottage. Reward promised." I'm going to put all these on all the trees in the lane and all the lampposts in the village, explained Mr. Hardwick. Blue's out there somewhere. I know she is. Mr. Hardwick's eyes were red as if he'd been crying, and Harrison suddenly felt very sorry for him. He felt a pang of guilt. Blue had always seemed so terrifying to him. He hadn't really thought about how fond Mr. Hardwick must be of their dog. Perhaps he should tell Mr. Hardwick the truth. After all, it wasn't like he'd meant to send Blue into the nothingness of his black hole. It was an accident. Harrison took a deep breath. It was time to tell Mr. Hardwick what had really happened. He said, trying to find the words. Mr. Hardwick? You've seen Blue? Exclaimed Mr. Hardwick. Have you, Harrison? Have you? Well, you see, she's in here, said Harrison, pointing at the black hole tied to his wrist. In your balloon, Mr. Hardwick asked, looking confused. It's not actually a balloon, explained Harrison. It's a black hole. I was given it at a birthday party. Mr. Hardwick looked even more confused and took a step towards the black hole to have a closer look. Don't touch it, exclaimed Harrison, or you'll get sucked inside. Right, said Mr. Hardwick in a way that made it very clear he hadn't the faintest idea what Harrison was talking about. Harrison took another deep breath. Blue jumped inside when I wasn't looking, he said, and he hasn't come back out. There was a long silence while Harrison waited for Mr. Hardwick to get really cross and start shouting at him. Instead, Mr. Hardwick's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, Harrison, he said. I'll keep Blue right here, in my heart. But you, he ruffled Harrison's hair, you can keep her in your balloon. That's not really what I meant, began Harrison. I'm sorry, said Mr. Hardwick. I meant to say, you can keep her in your black hole. And with that, he trudged off down the hill with his leaflets, leaving Harrison feeling very guilty indeed. As Harrison walked up the path, he glanced over the Hardwicks' front garden. Blue would usually be there, barking through the gaps in the fence. Was it true that once something fell into a black hole, it could never escape? Did that mean Blue was gone forever? Later that evening, Harrison felt even guiltier because while they were eating dinner, Lana gobbling her gammon and peas with gusto, while Harrison shoveled his into his black hole, the phone rang. Really? Harrison's father asked whoever was on the other end of the line. I'll certainly ask him. One moment. He put his hand over the mouthpiece. Harrison? Harrison looked up, wide-eyed. For a moment, he thought he'd been caught getting rid of his food. It's Hector Broom's mother. She said Hector didn't come home from school. Everyone's out looking for him. Have you seen him? Harrison looked at his black hole. then back at his father. Well? Asked his father. Harrison didn't want to lie, but he was too scared to tell the truth. And besides, when he tried to come clean early with Mr. Hardwick, he hadn't believed him anyway. Not since lunchtime, he said eventually, which wasn't exactly a lie, but wasn't exactly the truth either. He looked back at his now empty plate. Having a black hole had been very useful and quite fun. But it turned out that disappearing things wasn't as simple as he thought. That night, try as he might, Harrison simply couldn't sleep. And when he finally did, he had a terrible nightmare. He was by some roadworks when a black and white he was by some roadworks when a black and white dog with Hector Broom's face appeared and jumped up at him. Harrison ducked, and the creature sailed right over his head and into a cement mixer. By the time they got the animal out, the cement had mixed, freezing its furry body mid-leap, with just Hector's face peeping out, and his mother had to feed him through a straw until a vet arrived with a chisel. Harrison woke with a start. The black hole was tied to the end of his bed, just as it had been the night before. And now that it had digested a swimming pool, Hector Broom, an entire cupboard of school books, and all of the food that Harrison hated, it was bigger than ever. As Harrison lay in bed looking at it and thinking of poor Blue covered in cement, he had a moment of clarity. He knew what he had to do. He had to go to Shelley's grandmother's house, find Shelley and ask her how to get Blue and Hector back. He got himself dressed double quick, untied the black hole and tiptoed onto the landing. His parents' bedroom door was closed, so they must still be asleep. That's a good thing, he thought. If they saw him sneaking out this early, they might ask him some difficult questions. Once downstairs, he found a pencil and a piece of paper and wrote, "Dear Mother and Father, I'm going out for a walk for no reason. I'm absolutely not going to Shelley's grandmother's house. Love, Harrison." Satisfied, Harrison folded the note and left it in the middle of the kitchen table where he could be sure his parents would see it. Going out on his own was against the rules, but if he was back before his parents woke up, they need never know. And if they did wake up and found him gone, the note, he reasoned, would stop them worrying. He pulled his jacket off the peg, squeezed his feet into his wellies, tied the black hole safely to his left wrist, and stepped outside into the cold, early morning air. The lane was empty, and he saw, to his horror, that every tree was pasted with one of Mr. Hardwick's leaflets. Wherever he looked, Blue's face stared back at him. Feeling guilty than ever, he hurried down the hill to a little crooked house opposite the village school. He unhitched the weather-beaten gate, crunched up the little gravel path to the front door, and lifted himself onto his tiptoes so that he could reach the brass door knocker. There was no answer, so he knocked again. All the curtains were shut. "Shelley!" he called through the letterbox, which he noticed was decorated with a snake swallowing its own tail. "Shelley!" There was no answer. He was about to give up when one of the other upper windows opened and Shelley's grandmother popped her head through the curtains. "Shh," she said in a voice that Harrison thought was quite loud for someone asking him to be quiet. "Do you know what time it is?" "I can't." "Shh," said Harrison. "I need to speak to Shelley." "She's not home." "Where is she?" asked Harrison. Shelley's grandmother looked at one of her 3 wristwatches. "Probably halfway across the Atlantic Ocean," she said. "It's an emergency," said Harrison, holding up the black hole. "Something terrible has happened." Shelley's grandmother frowned. "You'd better come inside." It would be good for the sake of our story to say that seconds later, the front door opened and Shelley's grandmother and Harrison continued their conversation. But sadly, that wouldn't be true. Instead, there was a very long time when nothing much happened at all, and there was no sound from inside the house, and nothing for Harrison to do except wait. The postman strolled past with a sack of letters on his trolley. A woman walked down the street with her dog, and the sun grew so hot that Harrison wished he hadn't worn his jacket. He was beginning to wonder whether Shelley's grandmother had forgotten all about him when he heard a clicking and a whirring sound on the other side of the door. He peeked through the letterbox. Inside, he could just make out Shelley's grandmother's feet coming down the stairs on a very slow-moving stair lift. It felt wrong to watch someone when they couldn't see him. So Harrison closed the letterbox and waited patiently for the door to open. It didn't. The postman worked his way up the other side of the street. The woman returned with her dog and Harrison took off his jacket. He took another peek through the letterbox. Shelley's grandmother's feet had made some progress, but they were still coming very slowly down the hall. Finally, just when Harrison was wondering whether he should come back after lunch, the door opened. If Harrison had thought the letterbox on the door was strange, the inside of the house was even stranger. For a start, all the curtains were closed and the only light was cast from old-fashioned oil lamps. And from every direction there came the sound of ticking. Harrison followed Shelley's grandmother down the hall to the sitting room and saw that every wall, shelf, tabletop and cubbyhole was home to some sort of clock. Digital clock, wind-up clock, pendulum clocks, bedside clocks, carriage clocks, cuckoo clocks, alarm clocks, grandfather clocks and maritime clocks, all of them clicking and whirring impatiently. "Sit," said Shelley's grandmother, indicating a stool. "Thank you," replied Harrison. "Why do you have so many clocks?" he asked as he perched on the stool, keeping a careful hold of the black hole in case it accidentally swallowed something it shouldn't. "Well, you see, I have a very important appointment and I don't want to miss it," said Shelley's grandmother as she shuffled towards an armchair and sat down stiffly. "What kind of appointment?" Harrison asked. "An appointment with destiny," said the old lady mysteriously. "Now, you say there's a problem with your black hole," she said, clearly wanting to change the subject. "Yes," said Harrison. "Someone fell into it, and I need to know how to get them out." "Who exactly?" "Blue. She's my next-door neighbour's dog, and a boy called Hector Broom from my school, so I really need Shelley's help. When is she coming back?" The clock seemed to tick a little louder, as if to emphasise the long pause that followed. "Maybe never," said the old lady. "She's gone to South America, to a very large telescope in Chile. It's on top of a mountain, where there are no clouds and the sky is the brightest and clearest on Earth. It's the best place in the world to be an astronomer. She's hoping they'll give her a job." "But how am I going to get Hector Broom and Blue out without Shelley?" "There are 3 things you need to know about a black hole," announced the old lady. "Firstly, a black hole is black." "Right," said Harrison, nodding. That one seemed quite obvious, if he was honest. "Secondly, anything that touches it gets pulled inside." "Yes," said Harrison. He'd already seen that in action. "And thirdly," continued the old lady, "once something is inside, it can never come out unless—" "Unless what?" asked Harrison. The old lady was quiet for a moment, as if she was deciding whether to trust Harrison with one of her deepest secrets. "I think you'd better come with me," she said finally. Harrison helped her to her feet. That part of their meeting took almost as long as everything else put together, but it's not directly relevant to our story, so I won't bore you with the detail. Wasn't pretty, and included a very awkward moment when Harrison's head was used by the old lady as a sort of leaning post, and another one where she somehow ended up sitting on top of him on the floor. But eventually, through luck, perseverance, and brute strength, they found themselves out of the sitting room and back in the hallway, edging their way towards a large green door.